Good evening, or good afternoon. My name is Ben Helfon. I am the co-author of Our Happy Divorce, How Ending Our Marriage Brought Us Closer Together. Welcome to a Thursday edition of our live stream. Monday we were riddled with technical difficulties, and so we decided to push pause and redo it again today. Yeah, it was a shit show on Monday, but we got it figured out, hopefully, today. I am joined, as always, well, not as always, because we don't have Susan Guthrie, but we do have Kate Anthony. But I can't hear Kate Anthony. There you go.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. We're trying this again, man. Let's try not to have it be a shit show again this week.
No, I know it was a mess, but I think we might have it figured out. Except for, guess who we lost?
No,
you can't make this up.
You cannot make this up.
You cannot make this up. Well, hopefully they will dial back in.
Oh my God. Should we just talk? Should we just hang out and talk?
How you been?
I've been great.
Yeah?
I've been super good. I mean, 2021, look, it's a shit show out there still, but knock on wood, you know, my path to healing is good. So I've been great. My friend built me a deck for my birthday, which is in 2 weeks. And yeah, he built me a deck. Yes, it's done and it's gorgeous. I haven't posted pictures yet, but I will. But it's done, and he built this thing for me, and it is like he knows what he's doing. It's not like some slipshod piece of construction.
Are you gonna post? Are you gonna post it on social media when it's done?
I'll post it in my stories. It is done, but I feel like it needs furniture before I can like really reveal the after, you know, like I want get the furniture and make it like super cozy.
So where can people find that when you post it?
On my Instagram, on my stories in my Instagram, which is The Divorce Survival Guide on Instagram. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Ben.
So I think they're back. Oh,
good.
It must not be us. It must be them. But excited to have them back because I was excited about this week on Monday, and unfortunately we had to cancel it. But Jan and Jillian Yuhas are dedicated to helping individuals and families facing co-parenting complexities or divorce by amicably resolving disputes and increasing constructive communication for a peaceful resolution. Growing up in a divorced family themselves, they understand the importance of co-parenting and establishing a family structure that benefits the welfare of all parties involved. They assist their clients in reaching parenting agreements that are sustainable, diminish conflict through resolution tools, establish healthy boundaries, which I can't wait to talk about those today, cultivate healthy relationships, and simplify the divorce process through coaching and or mediation. So without further ado, and I have every toe crossed that this works.
This is gonna work.
Jan and Jillian.
Yay!
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
There we go. Welcome. Again.
Thanks for hanging with us, guys. Really, thank you. Thanks for coming back.
The funny thing is, you know, someone joins the live stream for the first time, and it's a total S show, and you know, we're trying to tell them this is the first time anything's ever gone wrong, and all this stuff, and it really is. I mean, that's, you know, I think through the year we've done this every Monday, or almost every Monday, no technical difficulties, but we're here. So
we have not. Here.
No. So thank you guys for joining us yet again. Like I said, tell us sort of, you know, how you guys got involved in doing what you're doing. Obviously, for those of watching, they are twins. they are sisters. How did you guys get started in the divorce space and the process that got you here?
Well, we are children of divorce. We actually had a pretty great experience being children of divorce. Both of our parents were always on board in terms of co-parenting and doing what was best for us. And we have a great relationship with both of our parents today. So we had a pretty good experience when it came to being children of divorce, and they were always supportive of us. I think our path in terms of helping families got started when we used to volunteer at a crisis hotline for teens who ran away from home. We did that for about 3 years, which inspired us to go to grad school and get our master's in marriage and family therapy. And from there, fast forwarding, we ended up getting certified in mediation, life coaching, and that's just kind of where we are today in terms of really helping families and all about creating healthy relationships and dynamics.
So, one of the things that we talked about, and I, cut it out of the intro, but the boundaries and the importance of laying down boundaries, but not only for what struck me in our conversation was not only for the parents or the divorced couple or whoever it is, but also for the kids. So you guys focus a lot on boundaries and take us through, and then Kate, obviously you are a boundary drawer yourself. So love to hear, how you guys see that and the importance of it and how to set boundaries. Let's start with the adults first.
First, I kind of want to address a myth. So a lot of people think boundaries are meant to shut the door and close somebody out. And really boundaries are more about bridging the gap between two different perspectives and figuring out how we can work together and have a better solution so everybody can function on a healthy system and honoring each other's values and limits within that relationship. A lot of people use ultimatums as boundaries, and that's actually the complete opposite. They're not threats. They're meant to grow that relationship and honor the respect between individuals. And so when it comes
just really quick,
here.
Well, that's so interesting, and I want to make sure that we cover that for a second. But healthy boundaries are ones that aren't line in the sand ultimatums, and those are more the unhealthy variety.
Correct. Yes. Ultimatums come from more of a fear-based thinking where it's like I'm trying to seek control or power, where boundaries come more from love-based thinking where how can we get that win-win outcome so everybody can be happy and move forward.
Wow.
Yeah. That.
Woo. Kate?
Yeah. I mean, I think the other misconception about boundaries, I love that, by the way, you guys. I love the way you framed that, because I think it's really, I know in program we talk about detaching with love rather than an axe, right? And I think that that's what you're talking about is the more nuanced version of that, right? So I think it's really, I love the way you guys have framed that. I think the other misconception about boundaries is that they are for the other, that they're about the other person, right? Someone will be like, my mother has no boundaries, right? As someone whose mother has no fucking boundaries, I can tell you that it's not her that, right? It just means that I have to have stronger boundaries. Like my mom sees my boundaries as goalposts. So my job is to constantly reinforce them. I always talk about boundaries as being like you wouldn't have a house in the middle of the woods that was being like constantly the bears and the deer were coming in and like eating all your vegetables in your garden. And like, you wouldn't expect the bears and the deer to build the fence to keep themselves out. You would build that fence, right? And then like the bears and the deer would do what they do naturally, which is try to find a way in, right? And then your job is to figure out where they're trying to find a way in and then reinforce the structure at that point, right? And then there might be a time when you decide that it's okay for the bears and the deer to come in. And so you have a gate that you allow yourself, that you have a key to, that you open, right? But this idea that the bear and the deer should be the ones building the fence is nonsense. It's insane, right? But that's what we do all the time with other people.
Right. We are responsible for setting our boundaries and honoring them with other people. And unfortunately, not everybody's always going to respect your boundaries, especially when you get into those difficult personality types. But it's up to you to do what's best for your own self-care and your own self-love in terms of honoring yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you
exactly
put that into a hypothetical scenario of how somebody might not honor themselves by sticking to their boundaries, or in a divorce situation, how that might look in real life?
For example, say you have an ex who floods your phone with text messages or emails all day long, creating conflict while you're going through the divorce. It's up to you to set the boundary with them in terms of what you find to be of value in terms of communication. Just like I don't find this communication to be very effective for us in terms of resolving our co-parenting communication. How about we exchange an email once a week back and forth in terms of addressing what we need to do in terms of communicating the needs of the children. How does that work for you? So it's kind of a negotiation back and forth. And then once that plan of action, so even if you set the boundary, you still have to have a plan of action in order to follow through on it. So once that plan of action is agreed upon by both parties in terms of what works for both parties. And we have to negotiate because obviously the other person may not agree to that. So you might say, okay, well, let's do 2 emails a week. How does that work for you? And so we come up with a plan, and then that allows you to keep to that plan. So if that other parent who tends to cross boundaries doesn't stick to the 2 times a week or the 1 time a week that was agreed upon for emailing in regards to the children's needs back and forth, and they start emailing every single day again, because they might stick to it for like 2 or 3 weeks or even a month, and then they start to slip and they start disrespecting that boundary. It's up to the parent who established the boundaries, like, okay, well, help me understand what happened to us honoring this boundary that we agreed upon in regards to communicating about our children. We need to go back to doing that. And that person has to basically almost ignore those extra emails that are coming through and say, I will talk to you once a week, and keep that line of communication open, but sticking to the format that they agreed upon.
Yeah.
Well, my ex and I wrote a book called Our Happy Divorce, but if I ever told her that, it would not be a happy divorce. So where does where does the best thing about having her not on this live stream? I miss her, and I wish she would join us more, but that I could just talk shit and she can't respond.
Can't do it, right? If she would just show up, she could defend herself. Oh,
exactly,
well, Nikki.
right. Her fault. I'm drawing boundaries. So in your practice and in your work, is that where the coaching and parenting plans sort of cross-pollinate? Because to me, there was a lot of coaching in how that person should respond, but also in the parenting plan was the email or whatever. Is that where they sort of cross-pollinate?
So a lot of times in parenting plans, you can add in terms of communication, drop-off times. You can articulate what it is that you feel works best. If you say communication via email would work best in regards to the children, then that can be put into your parenting plan. This also keeps conversations constructive. It eliminates emotional discord. It actually creates, healthy boundaries for everyone, and also supports not only each parent's health, overall emotional health, but then that also supports the children's health, because then they're not dealing with that extra stress or hearing things going on when the parent's frustrated because their phone keeps blowing up from text messages coming in.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
No, I was just going to say that, and then beyond, like, in terms of the boundaries, right? That when someone is consistently violating your boundaries, often people are like, but he just won't do it, right?
Or she.
And then that's when I say to my clients, or she. You're right, Ben. I'm sorry.
Sorry, did I just man shame you?
You did. No, you did.
Sorry.
You did. You did not all. You just not all men does, but that's okay. No, you did. No, but you're right. You're right. But if the person doesn't honor your boundaries, right? You don't just like throw up your hands and be like, well, I tried, right? Then it's like you set a rule in your inbox that all of the email communications go into a folder that you only check twice a week at the agreed upon times, or you block them on social media. I mean, you block them on your phone, and the only way that they can communicate is through a co-parenting app like Fair or something like that, right? If someone is consistently violating your boundaries, you still have a recourse, right? You still have choices. that you can make that you maybe wouldn't have made otherwise, but they are available to you as options. Like, so boundaries can start off with that, like, respectful conversation, but then they can also, like, blocking someone on your phone because they're violating your requests and your boundaries is also a boundary. It's just a little harsher, but don't start there, I think is what we're saying, right?
Right. We don't want to start there. We first want to try to negotiate a plan that works for both parties involved. In that way, if both parties are in agreement, they're more likely to comply with that plan that was established.
And that's, the cultivating the healthy relationship and simplifying the divorce process is part of the bio that I read. And it seems to me that would be a good start, is, not start off at this, conflict of blocking. And I know that Kate obviously didn't mean that right off the start, but that, make a plan and stick to it. The boundaries that I found so interesting that I want to have a conversation with you about, the kids' boundaries. You guys had mentioned it before the stream and on our call. So can you talk about that and what that looks like and what that means and how you coach your clients on it?
Yeah, so children, a lot of times we want to ask what they feel comfortable with. So you might be going over to a relative's house and saying, like, give your grandmother a hug or give her a kiss. Well, if the child's not feeling comfortable, you might want to ask, do you feel okay to give grandmother a hug? Do you feel okay to give grandmother? Because you want children to learn how to be able to communicate what feels good to them. But if we push them or force them to do things, then they're never going to know what their boundaries are or their limits are. And so they're going to always think people, when they get into adult relationships, people can just do whatever works for them, not what works for what feels good on their level. So it's always, we want to help them learn to honor whatever works. But I think a lot of times parents need to ask their children what feels good and what doesn't feel good. Also, a lot of times children like to have privacy, personal space. So respecting their journal, respecting their time alone in their room if they want to hang out and read a book. So there's all different types of boundaries, but making sure that we honor what feels good to the child, because children are going to tell us exactly what feels good and doesn't if we ask them versus demand.
Would you say that's
Amen,
age?
sister.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say that's age appropriate, or giving at a certain age more leeway as far as what they want, or is that not? Should we start from the beginning, or as early as possible?
We should honor children's even though they're children and the parents are kind of in charge, we should still treat them with the same amount of respect as you would another adult. So children are much wiser beyond their years than people realize. They pick up on everything. Even as like toddlers, instead of saying, go pick up your toys or put them away. Okay, are you done playing with your toys? Yes. Where do we put the toys when we're done playing them? We put them back in the bin, wherever we got them from. So you're asking them questions and you're guiding them to what you want them to do. And then also that respects them in terms of who they are as individuals, that you are respecting them and honoring and listening to them. But even when you get into more the teenage years, when teenagers have obviously their like limits or boundaries or whatever, when it comes to disciplining teenagers, you want to almost negotiate with them. They're wise enough, or even a junior high, they're wise enough to know what their discipline should be if they do something they're not supposed to do. And so you're teaching them how to kind of have responsibility in life and take responsibility for their actions and repercussions of consequences if they do something they're not supposed to.
Also, too, children learn trust around the age 2 or 3. So whenever they start learning to trust themselves to make decisions, that sets them up for that confidence and self-esteem, healthy self-esteem going forward.
And I would say it's never too early to teach children to have autonomy about their bodies, and that consent matters, right? So about like giving grandma a hug and kiss or whatever, that's a consent issue. And it is never too early to teach children to, about consent ever. And that's a boundary. That's a boundary. Right. This is my body. Please don't touch it is a boundary.
So one thing that the effects of a divorce on kids. You guys were lucky enough to grow up in a amicable, high conflict divorce with your parents. I was not. I was not. As of 17 years old, or Nikki, my son, can say that he grew up in a amicable divorce. Some of the effects that you've seen on kids, behavioral, later on down the lines of a high conflict divorce.
So a lot of times children of high conflict divorce, they don't know how to process their feelings because they aren't taught how to self-soothe. And a lot of times they might pick up habits from their parents in terms of how they're communicating with their ex or how they're handling the divorce itself. So children, we might see them have anxiety, they might go into a rage, they might have the outburst of emotion through their behaviors, which is telling us their story internally because they don't know how to process their feelings. So they're acting out in a way which is saying, I don't feel good on the inside. I don't know how to express what it is that I need, and I need help in order to self-soothe and recenter so I can connect with myself.
Kate, you want to touch on that?
No, I think it's a great point. I think that kids are, as the beautiful lady said a minute ago, that children are, they're so much more in touch with themselves and with reality than what we give them credit for. And I think one of the most important things we can do for kids is help them name things, right? And notice their behaviors, and also just talk about what's going on. Even if they're super young, they know, they're so intuitive. They are so incredibly intuitive. They know exactly what's happened. They don't know exactly what's happening, but they know something's happening. And if we're acting like there's nothing happening, it teaches them to discredit and doubt their own sense of reality, which is, probably one of the most damaging things that you can do to a human, right? Is to sort of teach them that what they see, what they feel, what they're experiencing is not true, right? So it doesn't, right. even if they're super little, there are ways that you can talk to. And I had a client recently who has a 2-year-old, and I was like, have you spoken to her about what's going on? And because she was talking about how her daughter was regressing, and she had been fully potty trained, and she was having accidents all over the place, and every day she was having all these accidents, just like you were talking about. And and I finally said, well, wait a minute, have you spoken to her about the fact that she's living in two different houses all of a sudden, and she was like, well, not really, because she's so little. And I was like, no, you got to name it. And, because you're right, she was expressing externally what she was feeling internally, and she was regressing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That's really common for children to regress when they're under stress, just because they don't know how to speak or verbalize what it is that it's going on internally.
Right.
But a lot of times too, children can't communicate yet about what they're feeling. A lot of times coloring or drawing, if they use a certain color, ask what that color means. Or if there's an action figure and they're fighting back and forth, well, tell me more about that. What's going on here? Because a lot of times they'll act out what they're feeling in the types of activities that they're doing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, the myth, at least, again, this is my experience with my parents, but the myth that kids are resilient is exactly that. I think it was a myth, or they'll get over it. I think that's sometimes used as ammunition to maybe back up some behaviors. But if you question that, I think, we had a guest on Ellen Bruno 2 weeks ago who made a documentary called Split. And I would encourage everybody watching to see the effects of divorce on children from, what was it, 6 to 9 or 6 to 10 years old, in that range. Yeah. Interview these kids, and it is heart-wrenching to watch. But the other topic I want to talk about was healthy communication. We sort of talked about it with boundaries. But it's something you guys, talk about and work on. And what does that look like in a divorce?
So usually we recommend the 3 C's of communication, which is calm demeanor when you're communicating, because nothing can be resolved from heightened emotion. It only exacerbates the situation. Concise messaging, keep your messages back and forth, very concise, matter of fact, and to the point of what needs to be communicated. So stick to the facts and remove the emotion, and also be constructive, be very positive in terms of what you're communicating in order to work towards solutions and what's best for the children moving forward. A lot of times parents get in this battle of me versus you when it's really about what are we doing for our children. So going from that me mindset to a we mindset transitions the whole different way of communicating with each other.
Wow. Yes. Kate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Oh gosh, I think there's so many aspects to healthy communication. I think knowing, sometimes it's a matter of asking permission, right? Is it okay for us to have this conversation right now? Are you in a position where you can hear what I'm saying, right? Because so often we just launch into shit and people are like not remotely in a place, they just got off work and they're already having a bad day. And like, if you're in that space and someone says, hey, can we have like a heavy divorce conversation? They're going to be like, actually, no. And you have to honor that. Like, if you're going to and say like, okay, so when might be a good time? Can we talk later tonight? Or like, what do you need? So asking for permission to actually have the conversation, asking for, and then present it, keeping things, I think, in I language, right? You're not going to get anywhere when you're coming from, blaming language. You did this, or you, right? But it's, I'm
Right.
confused about something. I'm having a really hard time with this thing. I'm wondering if we can come to, if we can talk about this so that we can come to a better agreement about it, right? And, I think that's the most important thing, is to keep it in I language, because the blaming and shaming gets nowhere fast.
Correct. And also, I just want to say, if someone does ask, is this a good time to talk? And that person says no. Don't just end it with a no. Like you said, make sure you follow through with letting them know when you can talk. Because if you just say, no, I can't talk to you right now, that's going to frustrate the other parent. And then that starts creating like a controlling game back and forth. So make sure there's always a follow through plan of what's going to happen next. So there's clarity between the two, parents.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if the other person just says no, then you say like, well, when would be a good time? Right. So don't just take the no. Right.
Right.
So the, one thing is, I think we've seen the power and the dangers of keyboard on, society as a general, and also, it can have it in divorce. And not that I'm playing, Nikki and I, when we got divorced, it wasn't, text messaging was sort of new. And, at what point, or do you, stop the text chain or the email chain back and forth and recommend that people actually get on the phone or meet in person? Or is that just, I don't know, and I don't like to play this game, but the what if game, but I think it would be very hard for Nikki and I to have the outcome we had today if we had text messaging, because that's when we get in our biggest fights today, is this misunderstanding or this back and forth, or, a quick, either a quick message or one where you actually sit there and spend, however long instead of picking up the phone. So is that, is that a cog in the wheel of a healthy communication?
So a lot of times communication gets misconstrued in email or text because we can't always understand the tone of voice somebody might be using. So if things, though, you start to see certain types of verbiage being used, or if they're, using a lot of exclamation points, like you just notice a change in the behavior, if you can, try to address it and say, listen, like if this isn't working, maybe we should talk to someone that can help us out, like a third party, whether it's a co-parenting coach or a family mediator, someone that can help us work through this. So a lot of times there's not always going to be that like, okay, this is the time or this is when to take the action. It's going to sort of be up to the other party. And if one person suggests it and they say, I would like to bring someone else on because we're not reaching a win-win outcome in the best interest of our children, then we're going to be able to explore that option with them. But if they are against it, they might come around and actually try to work with you because they don't want to hire an outside party.
And I think it just varies depending on the couple. If they feel like everybody communicates differently. So some people prefer text and email. Some people do prefer to have phone calls. So I think that just varies amongst different families and what they prefer for their communication type. And if one parent prefers to talk on the phone and one prefers to text, then we gotta kind of find a middle ground here in terms of how they are going to be able to communicate.
Yeah, I hate texting, or I'm sorry, I hate talking on the phone, but I think that if I look back in Nikki and my relationship, I don't think we've ever really gotten that big of a shouting match or throwing the F-bombs or whatever you do on the phone. Most of that happens over text message or emails. But Kate, go ahead. I know you want to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that for some people, it's really not safe to have phone calls. So I know that I'm sort of on the other side of the spectrum here, and that I work with a lot of people who are getting out of abusive relationships, and picking up the phone and talking to someone who's like super controlling and dominating, who you've had a real power imbalance with for a really long time, can be just like the recipe for disaster. So I think it really does. It is a case by case thing. I have a client who's like, we have the best conversations by text and email. Like that is the best way to communicate. We don't fight at all, but as soon as we get on the phone, we're at each other's throats. So I think it's different. Yeah. Choosing what's best. Yeah. And I think when, working with someone, for me, like working with women and empowering them and like really working to change this power imbalance, the person who has historically been in control and been dominant is going to get really sort of, triggered by the person that they're used to having dominance and control over, trying to like level that playing field, and they're going to work harder. And this person who's really, I have clients who are so used to being the passive voice in the relationship that it's working a new muscle to be able to have these conversations and not be passive and not sort of, capitulate, right? And so that's easier to do in slow increments, right? So doing it by text message or by email might be like the equivalent of like, running a mile as opposed to a marathon, which would be talking on the phone.
Yeah. One thing that you had brought up, and I think we said it so many times in the book that the editor said you can't say this anymore. But what's best for the kids? Ours was what was best for Asher. What is the test on that? How can you tell the true what's best? Sometimes I think it gets lost in the ego, of the divorced couple. But how do you coach your clients, or Kate, you too, on what the real best litmus test or whatever you want to call it to really get to that answer? Because I think sometimes in a decision, at least for Nikki and I, you could ask the same question and get three different answers. And what was best for me, what was best for Nikki, what was best for Asher. But sometimes it almost felt like you wanted to make the decision what was best for me. And I know that probably made no sense. But when you guys talk about what's best, here, let's try this way. When you guys talk about what's best for the kids, what does that mean?
So when we say what's best for the kids, we're looking at like, how does this like psychologically, emotionally, mentally, physically affect the child in terms of making healthy decisions? Like, how is it going to impact their overall day-to-day lifestyle, or their schooling, or their extracurricular activities? Maybe it's medical. Like, how does that affect the child in terms of looking at how they might process if you'd make new decisions where they have to get into new, extracurricular activities, like new sports. Like if one child doesn't want to partake in a sport, but both parents or one parent say, no, the child's going to do that, that might have a negative impact on the child, even though they're wanting that child to be socially involved with other people. But if a child says it doesn't feel good, then we need to honor that. And so we might be making decisions, but we also need to be flexible in terms of making decisions, because things might change across the way once that child experiences something new that could feel good or not feel good.
Kate, you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I agree, right? That, it was the classic what my mediator said to us on our like first day of mediation. And he said, do you want to put your son at the center or in the middle of all of this? And we were like, I mean, the center, obviously. And it was easy to say in the beginning, but, it was a lot harder as the process went through, and we'd butt up against some stuff. And then he'd be like, what's best for Emmett? And the answer was very clear, right? So there's that through the divorce situation. And then there's, my wheelhouse, which is, should I stay or should I go? And what is best for kids? And, certainly toxic environments are not good for kids, super bad for kids. Even loveless marriages, not that great for kids. So what is it that you're modeling to them, and knowing that whatever sort of, especially in more high conflict marriages, whatever trauma you're generating in your marriage is the trauma and the scarring that they're going to repeat in their relationships when they're an adult. So if you don't want your kid to be in this marriage, then you got to get out of this marriage, because this is exactly what they're going to do later on in life, which is a bummer.
Parents
often that's like, yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Go.
Children learn from what is role modeled to them in the home. So even if parents aren't speaking, whatever actions they're taking, the children are picking up on them nonstop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if they're not speaking, that's even also, it's also not what you want, right? Like, yeah.
So yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say, so our nonverbal body language accounts for 93% of the conversation and communication that's being exchanged. So even if no one's communicating, we can still feel that energy, or see how someone might throw their hands up, or they might arms, or you can tell if they're like having a good day or a bad day just by how they're carrying themselves, or maybe they're just sitting on the couch happily reading a book, or maybe they're laying down with a blanket over them because they're having a bad day. So a lot of times children are picking up on their parents' emotions and how they are interacting, or if they're going around like throwing stuff, slamming doors, that parent's probably in a bad mood. They're probably angry. And so we have to be able to be more aware of our behaviors, or especially if you're yelling at children, they're going to think, okay, if I do something wrong, I'm not loved because my parent yells at me all the time and doesn't like me. They hate me actually, So children learn all these things, and we don't even know what's going to affect them later on in life. But a lot of times if you're always yelling at your child, they may think, nobody wants me, nobody loves me, I'm not good enough, I'm the bad kid. And so they start creating those narratives early on around, 4 or 5, which then sets them up for their adult life and relationships.
And so mitigation tactic to that is what we had talked about earlier, and for maybe people who didn't join, the boundaries of the kids and allowing them to express themselves.
Yeah, when it comes to the children, they need to have healthy forms of way to express themselves, because if the parents are role modeling negative ways to handle emotions, the children are going to pick up those same exact behaviors in terms of how to handle their emotions later on. So it could be a boundary in the sense that a parent needs to be aware of how they are processing their emotions, and it's a boundary that they need to be aware of, that they don't pass on to their children if they don't want their children to handle anger or in the way that they do. If they're breaking something, or they like throw a book across the room, whatever it is, if they are slamming doors in the house, if you don't want your child to pick up on that, then you have to become more self-aware, because then you're crossing that child's boundaries of their development.
Wow. tips. This is the best free advice people can get here. And if, I mean, sometimes it's I've used the analogy of the cucumber becoming the pickle. And once it becomes the pickle, it can never become the cucumber again. But when in the beginning, if somebody's watching this or listening, and they're beginning the process, how can they start off in a healthy, learn resolution tools and boundaries and all the stuff that you guys coach and your practice is built on?
Well, the
How
first
to
step
do it right.
is definitely getting a the first step is getting a parenting plan in place, because that makes things easier when it comes to parenting, because then we have factorial agreement that we can refer back to when it comes to any sort of discord or differences in parenting styles of things that might come up later on. It helps us hold each parent accountable for their responsibilities when it comes to parenting the child. So I recommend getting a parenting plan in place first. If the parents are unable to be productive when it comes to communication and there's still a power struggle that's being created, then at that point in time, you might have to hire an outside source in terms of helping them. Because nowhere in life do we really learn how to properly communicate. We don't learn how to really go about relationships in a healthy manner. We didn't even learn this in grad school. All the boundaries and everything we've created since then and all of our programs we've developed on our own outside of in the communication tools and everything. So yeah, we didn't even learn it when we were going to school to help people. So that just goes to show you, and it's nowhere in our home do we say, okay, well, your parents didn't probably ever tell you this is how to communicate properly. It's kind of just like an unknown. And so It's almost like until you do your own research or until you hire an expert who's definitely very knowledgeable in that area, it's okay to not know these things. It's very common to not know how to communicate. But yeah, I would say definitely get a parenting plan in place, and try to remove any emotional discord or any sort of hurt or pain that either parent has gone through from the dissolution of that marriage, because you need to work through that anger or work through that pain in order to heal, so you can just focus on parenting the children. And sometimes that might be doing your own self-development and your outside of the parenting relationship, because we are responsible for our own self-care, our own self-love, and how we process our emotions.
Kate?
Yep, absolutely. Well, I mean, I always say that you're making the biggest financial and legal decisions of your entire life in the middle of the biggest emotional upheaval of your entire life. And it's a terrible combination. So I completely agree that you have got to process through the emotional stuff. Like, I think before you even begin to think about the divorce and like negotiating and all of that, like, take a breather, take some time to focus and to focus on yourself and to do your healing, so that when you come to the table to start the mediation or litigation or whatever, hopefully not litigation, but mediation process, you're doing it from where you're actually able to put your kids at the center, right? Had I still been really angry, it would have been really hard for me to make decisions that, and I think the same thing for you, Ben, like if you were still super angry, doing the math to make sure that Asher, or in my case, Emmett, was at the center of every one of our decisions would have been a lot harder when our ego is really still like leading the charge, right? And so there's a lot of work to be done with divorce coaches in particular, to be able to heal that, so that you can then come to the process far more willing and able to put your kids first. Because we think often when you're still all like up in it, you think you're doing what's best for your kids, but really it's your ego driving that.
And I guess that's what, when I was fumbling over that question about what was best for the kids, is I guess what, at least for me, would have been impossible for me to really make a decision on what was best for Asher. I might have said it, but if I had that emotional, stuff and the resentments towards Nikki, I think decisions would have been meant to hurt her, which ultimately, I think would have hurt Asher. Talk about a parenting plan and what that looks like. and in a perfect world, the parents have done some work on themselves and cleaned up their side of the streets, and at least gotten to a place where emotion isn't at the forefront, but maybe in the background a little bit. And what you do with parents to work through a parenting plan?
So when it comes to a parenting plan, we focus on all the responsibilities that each parent will have in terms of major decision making for the child's life. It could be from education to medical, even counseling, dental, education, extracurricular activities, traveling outside the country. Introducing new partners is a big one that we always include, that tends to be left out sometimes during litigation, but it's always a source of discord between parents. So that's something that we always work through in terms of our parenting plans, just because we also know the psychological long-term effects it has when you introduce a new partner to a child. And we always recommend a good 6 months or a year of dating prior to introducing the new partner to a child, just because of the psychological impact it can have on that child. They can feel neglected and whatnot. So then when it comes other things that we include, it could be also we work through any sort of parenting style differences. Obviously, some people are on board in terms of co-parenting. Some work better just as parallel in terms of their parenting. But we try to work through any major differences in order to create consistency in the children's lives. Because if you have one parent that says the kids can stay up till 9 and one says they have to go to bed at 8, it causes structural issues for the children, and then they start to weigh the parents against each other. So we want to try to avoid that, so everybody's kind of on board and on the same page. What else do we include in parenting plans?
Holidays.
Oh yeah, holidays, birthdays.
Location for pickup, drop-off times.
Allocation of parenting time, who's going to have the kids and when. So
financial responsibilities. A lot of times, one parent might pay for extracurricular activities, where the other one might, be more responsible for like day-to-day type things that the child wants to do. So it just really depends on each individual parenting plan and what works best for that couple in terms of financial. But usually that's something that really has to get worked out as well in terms of how you're going to best support the children. Because your children need to thrive.
Is there, there seems to be, obviously, every parenting plan is different. It's not one size fits all, but some of them, it sounds like, are very detailed and very, you talk about drop-offs, and I understand the big picture ones and the big ticket items, but is there any correlation between the more detailed ones and the more, finite items to a better process, better outcome?
I take it to a step further than most, just because we try to eliminate the discord that's going to come later between the co-parents. So we try to get as much out of the way, and that has to be taken care of in the parenting plan to try to eliminate any of the discord later on. But there should be details of pickup time and drop-off time, just to keep everybody accountable for their actions. Because if you don't know who's picking the kids up on Wednesday, and then it's not a parent agreement, they're like, well, it was your responsibility. No, it was yours. And then the children aren't picked up from school, so then we got a problem. I recommend doing what's best and putting more details in, the better, just to try to eliminate any sort of conflict later on.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think I will say that there's stuff that has come up throughout the course of my divorce that, like, we never had a parenting plan because we were like, we're fine, right? And then there's this stuff that comes up, like, if Monday is his day, but it's a holiday, what time does he get him? Like, there's so many things that came up for us that we were able to work through, but like, oh my God, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. And I think it's great to have someone like you guys to be like, here are all of the things that you have to think about going into this. It's like premarital counseling. Like, if anybody had said, like, here's all of the shit that comes up in marriage that you're probably going to have to figure out how to deal with, like, you would be thinking about a lot more things than you even think that you're going to be thinking about. that makes sense at all.
Yeah, no, I
and
mean,
the same
Yes,
thing
it
with
does.
divorce, right? Right. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, guess what? You're going to have to figure out like what time is drop off. Okay. And what about when there's a school holiday? What if there's no school? What if they're homesick? Like who handles what at what point? And I think the more contentious the divorce process, the more minutia you really have to get into with parenting plans.
yeah,
Correct.
I don't remember if Nikki and I think we did have to do a parenting plan for our collaborative, but we never put anything about raising a teenager. You know, and the complications that are. I mean, that's.
No.
I don't. Yeah, no.
Oh my
I mean,
God. Oh
yeah.
my God. Like we didn't put in like, what if he just decides he wants to be at one parent's house and not the other because he's like sick and tired of his shit going back and forth, like, I guess
so
you
we
can't
d-
answer that when you have a 3-year-old.
No, yeah, that was so far beyond our comprehension. We do have a question I'm going to put up here. Do you have any experience adding health concerns or conditions of the other parent and how it will be discussed or brought up to the kids? Like if someone had a heart attack? Yeah.
So if one parent is to have like health complications or is deceased, like we obviously put that in the parenting plan and who the children would go to or who would have legal rights of the children. If that's an ongoing like condition that parent has preconditions prior to this and they've had complications during that marriage or during their co-parenting time with, even if they're just split and never married, but if they had complications prior to that going on, then yes, it might be something you want to put in the parenting plan, knowing that this could happen and how we're going to prepare for it in the future. So we already have decisions made that supports everybody's interest.
You also might want to put in there too, if one parent becomes psychologically unfit or becomes addicted to drugs or alcohol, then you need to take precautions in that situation too. What's the plan? Are we going to go back to court? They have to go to therapy? So that's another thing that we include in there if one parent becomes unable to care for the children.
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's that I don't know the exact. I mean, obviously that was just a short thing, but I think most of it's also protected by being a parent. If unfortunately, if the legal guardian, the legal parent, if one of the parents were deceased, but I guess again the devil's in the details. So what? How can people get in touch with you? You guys are wonderful. And what can people, if they're going through it, when to come to you, how you can help them out, and more about what you guys do.
We help families during the process and usually after the process in terms of their co-parenting relationship or even children of divorce. Or like I said, we also help parents going through the process or everything that they're going through emotionally as well. So people can find us at divorcefamilymediations.com, or they can follow us on Instagram as well at Divorce Family Mediation. And you can always shoot us a DM, so we check them on the daily. So yeah, that's what we do. We are very children focused, and we just want to help families be able to work through any sort of discord and get to a healthier and happier functioning place.
Are one of you tasked with boundaries and one of your expertise, or do you guys just share the load?
We share the load.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing.
But we're lucky to have each other to bounce ideas off of or to collaborate. So you always have a sounding board.
Yes, because sometimes if we have a complicated case or one parent needs to see separate, then we will send that person to the other one where one of us might have both parents together. So we try to make sure everything is on a very even basis.
Is most of your work done with the parents together? And is it? I might have gotten this wrong, and forgive me if I did, but your work is outside of collaborative and that whole process, correct? Or do you work with the collaborative process?
No, so everything we do is private. We do work with some lawyers, but most of the work we do is private. We are online virtually, so co-parents can be in the comfort of their own home, and they don't even have to come to a meeting location, because we do work with clients nationally, and I've had a few international cases as well. So everything is virtual, online, and from the comfort of your own home.
Wow. Divorce mediations, divorcefamilymediations.com. And
Correct.
that's your social media as well?
Social media is without the S at the end. Divorce Family Mediation.
Well, thank you for joining us twice. Once on Monday, and well, I guess twins, right? You can watch
Double the trouble.
Yeah, exactly. You can watch the 2 minutes that we did with Jan and Jillian on Monday until we had technical difficulties, and we made it through an hour without any technical difficulties. So I appreciate it, you guys. Thank you so much. It was very informative for me, so I'm sure it was for everybody who watched.
Yeah.
Kate,
you guys are great. Yeah.
Kate, thank you.
Hi.
And that's
Thanks, Ben.
that's where Kate can be found. Where? Right here. Divorce Survival Guide on Instagram. Her award-winning podcast, the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, and kateanthony.com, and everything at Our Happy Divorce. And for Susan Guthrie, who couldn't join us today because she's stuck in a snowstorm somewhere, Divorce in a Better Way and Divorce and Beyond podcast. So with that, thank you guys very much. And
Thank you so much for having us.
I guess have a great
Thank
weekend
you
coming up.
guys.